Hey troops, welcome back to the channel. My name's Ryan, and today we're going to be reacting to one of my favorite channels of all time, Johnny Harris, a recent video he put out about 4 days ago titled "The US Military is Planning for a War with China." Now, Johnny Harris is, he not only is a brilliant videographer, but the information that this guy puts together and collates on a single video is absolutely phenomenal. Again, I've been a fan of his for quite a while now, so hopefully it's okay to react to this. Johnny, please let me react to this, brother. I want to put my spin on it. Hopefully you allow that, and yeah, we're going to get into that today, guys. Before we do, a little bit of admin. So, as always, guys, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already been notified. We now have an online coaching platform that I run specifically, and you're welcome to come and join that fitness journey, guys. If you want to change your body, mind, spirituality, whatever, however you're feeling, okay, then please join that online coaching platform. I can help you, whether it's getting in shape for a summer holiday or whether it's changing your physical lifestyle, your physical literacy long term, then let me help you do that, guys. I'm currently coaching quite a few people on there. We're going to have to recruit a few more instructors on that platform to help out with it. So if you want to see that in action, link in description, guys. You want to be accountable and start changing yourself today, be trained by a former Royal Marines Commando, then please continue to check that link below, and let's crack on with it, guys. I look forward to coaching you. Anyway, let's crack on with this video.
There's a small volcanic island off the southern coast of Japan called Mageshima. Nobody lives here. But here's footage from January 2023 of construction workers arriving to this island. Their task is to build a couple of runways on the island and some storage facilities for ammunition. The Japanese government has been paying local fishermen to stay away from this island. That's because they're turning it into a military base. The island is being built by Japan, but one of its main purposes has to do with the United States. American fighter jets and aircraft carriers have had to do their drills and practices down here on this island. But now they're able to station at this island, moving them much closer to this ocean and to one country in particular.
This is potentially the next big conflict, guys. Not necessarily within the next 5-10 years either. I'm talking next 6 months to 1 year, depending on how this video pans out with the information received. Japan, China, things aren't looking too good over there, guys, especially with how things have escalated with Ukraine. Will China seize the day and take an opportunist type of approach with Japan? I think they possibly could.
Mageshima is just one of many islands that are being loaded up with military hardware, most of it coming from the United States. It's part of this chain of militarized islands, an effort of defense or aggression, depending on how you look at it. It's a line that centers on Taiwan. And it's what one official was referring to when they said that 2023 is likely to stand as the most transformative year in U.S. force posture in this region in a generation. This line is a symbol of the rising tensions between global superpowers. And I want to show you why this is happening now and what it means for the future of this conflict.
This is unlike anything the U.S. Navy has done since World War II.
Tensions are rising in one of the most hotly contested regions on the planet, the South China Sea.
Yeah, South China Sea, man.
Hey, I'm going to pause the story really quick to tell you about today's sponsor, who is Copilot, which is a time size. Hey, about time. Accountability and consistency is the hardest thing with fitness, as we all know. And Copilot in the video, there's a link in my, which is something. Okay, so this document from the U.S. Department of Defense. This document is called the National Defense Strategy of the United States of America, which also includes the Nuclear Posture Review and Missile Defense Review. It's basically a report that they release every 4 years that gives us an understanding of what the U.S. military is up to, what they care about.
The US military, on that one, troops, we can definitely say there's been some big changes over the past few years with regard to the US military in general. Now, not just from a, how can I put it? Not from a necessarily from a militarily point of view either. The United States military have went through a lot of political changes of recent. I know they're going through this, I don't want to say the woke movement, but things are changing, opinions are changing, okay? The type of rhetoric surrounding the US military hasn't been, over the past few years, that of a tough, hard, arduous nature. It's been more of a fluffy pink type of nature. You can make your own assumptions up of why that potentially is happening, but be rest assured, whilst all of that's going on, I have no doubt that the US military is still performing and functioning to the highest standard that it can possibly do, and it's still the world's most dominant military force, regardless of what internal problems may be going on. Every military does have this, but the United States has been going through quite a lot recently. Still bloody awesome,
this
though.
Year's is more detailed than normal. The document focuses a lot on China.
If China threatens our sovereignty, concerns directly with China.
The DoD says that China, quote, remains our most consequential strategic competitor for coming decades. Why? Because, the Pentagon says, China is bullying its neighbors to, quote, reshape the region and the international system to fit its authoritarian preferences. Now, remember that the United States, who spends loads on its military, has set the rules for our global order, how we trade, what political systems we favor, who participates in the system, and now we see a country that wants to dethrone them, to create a new system based on other values and other rules. And what scares the US military is that China is rapidly modernizing and expanding their military. China's military is growing incredibly fast. Like, they deploy the equivalent of an entire new British Navy every 4 years. Every 4 years, it's like new British Navy, like new Royal Navy every 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's try and put that into give a little bit of context to that. British Navy is certainly not what it used to be. Let's get that straight. I'm not going to shit on my own Navy, all right? I was a part of the Royal Navy, being a Royal Marine. Fantastic Navy, but our capability has definitely shrunk over the past few decades, post-Cold War. Shrunk down massively, all right? It's not the force it used to be, formidably wise, and it's still great in terms of how it can operate and function. We're professional through and through, but manpower, numbers, all of that, budget, it's dwindled down to pretty much nowhere near where it used to be, guys. So, yeah, every 4 years for a country as big as China, with a budget like China, with the military, they want to have a bigger military capability, and we seem to not want a bigger military capability because we latch onto the size of the United States. That's one of the main reasons. So, yeah, in context, yeah, that's great, but doesn't really mean too much either, okay? I'm not surprised.
They're just growing very quickly. This report is concerned about China's growing strength and military footprint. How China is coercing its neighbors, disregarding ocean boundaries, testing missiles, bullying fishing vessels in other countries' waters, building islands and military bases on those islands, and flying over other countries' airspace. And especially in Taiwan, the island that China claims as their own and where the globe gets nearly all of their advanced microchips, which is a topic I made an entire video about. The point is, Taiwan is an incredibly important island for the United States. All of this together makes China, quote, the only country that has the intent and power to actually challenge the US-led global order and rewrite global rules and norms, something the US has gotten really comfortable doing over the last 70 years. So this is why the US considers China the most consequential strategic competitor for coming decades. And they've created a plan to respond. And in their words, we cannot delay. They give themselves this 10-year window to implement some major changes. And this is what it looks like. Okay, first things first. The US military is already very present in Asia. We've got about 8,000 troops in Guam. We've got over 100 bases in Japan with about 21,000 American troops on the mainland and another 24,000 stationed down here on the Japanese island of Okinawa. Go up to South Korea and you'll find 22,000 US troops. And then you've got the US Navy, who operates out of this port in Singapore. This has been the status quo in Asia for decades.
So that's like, just those numbers alone is pretty close to what, the British military has entirely for manpower.
And it has been the way that the US has ensured security for its allies. And it's kind of mostly worked to help secure American interests and deter conflict. The US has maintained strong alliances in this region.
This is a question I want to ask you guys, though. Is American interests your interests? Is American interests British interests, French interests? You know, is it the interests of the greater population of the world, apart from China, the obvious ones, Russia, Korea? Are their interests the rest of ours? Because although we have our own differences culturally, you know, a lot of their interests, I would prefer to have their interests, you know, ruling and dictating the way my life is led to a degree, other than, say, China coming in, their interests being played out. I would much rather follow the US storybook than China's. How would you like to see things?
And frankly, the Pentagon has kind of been distracted with other things. 2 wars that happened in the Middle East over the past 20 years.
My fellow citizens, my fellow citizens, my fellow citizens.
But as those conflicts wind down, and as China militarizes, the Department of Defense says that this status quo, all of these troops in Asia, it's not enough. They talk about this new kind of deterrence. Integrated deterrence. The only kind of military posture that will actually keep China at bay. And this is what it looks like. The smallest part of the strategy has to do with American bases. They're going to reopen a base in Guam and move some troops there. But the majority of this strategy has to do with American allies in Asia. Allies that are in lockstep with the US's goal to deter and contain China. The Pentagon calls partnering with its allies the center of gravity for this strategy. So let's start with Japan, one of the US's closest allies in the region. Japan is a country that is deeply concerned about a more powerful China, with its massive navy and its ambitions to control Taiwan. And it's very easy to forget that Japan isn't just this. It's actually all of this. It extends way down here because of all these islands. These islands curve nicely all the way down till they hit Taiwan. All of these are Japanese islands. I mean, if you look at Japan's national defense strategy, translated into English, you will see something that looks strikingly similar to what the Pentagon released. They're both really freaked out about China, and they both are ready to act in lockstep to deter a more aggressive China in the region.
Man, Johnny Harris is so smart. I wish I could understand more of what he's saying.
So it starts up here with that island that we talked about at the beginning, Magashima, this new military base and airstrip to be used by both Japanese and US militaries. Further south is Amami Island, where Japan has recently added long-range missiles and anti-ship missiles. Potentially they're going to add cruise missiles.
So that whole strip is almost like a natural barrier of defense. Can you see why China wants to take a little bit more control of Japanese waters and Japanese areas of interest? Because if they do, they pretty much have a beautiful line of defense protecting China, really, from a naval attack. So can you imagine if they controlled all those islands? They pretty much control the seas from potential attack. It's phenomenal.
These are missiles that they're buying from the United States. These are missiles that are definitely in range of the Taiwan Strait. Next to the chain is Okinawa, where the US has a huge presence of tens of thousands of troops already. Japan also has military bases here and is adding even more long-range missiles and electronic warfare units, which are military installations meant to disrupt and deny communication signals. On these 2 islands down here, they're adding even more long-range missiles, which could potentially be used to attack Chinese naval ships and aircraft. And Japan is placing nearly 600 troops on Ishigaki as well. And finally, you've got this last militarized island in the chain, Yonaguni. It's the closest island to Taiwan. And here Japan is adding more of those electronic warfare units, which are used to jam communication signals or to listen in on their communications. You know, they're right next to China. Japan is also positioning more troops here. So this is the first part of our chain. And when paired with training that Japan and US troops are doing to simulate island and amphibious warfare, it sends a really strong signal to China that Japan is ready to respond if needed. This line also serves as like a...
When he says Japan is ready to respond if necessary, you could translate that to, you know, Japan and the United States are ready to respond, because I personally don't think Japan would respond without, you know, the support directly from the United States. It wouldn't be an independent thing, just by the way they kind of coexist on these islands together. You know, like you said, Japan, US, both have very similar interests. Japan wants to keep itself safe, and America's prepared to keep Japan safe for the interests of what Japan and Taiwan can provide, you know. So it makes perfect sense that they want to do what they're doing together.
physical barrier that any Chinese ship or submarine would have to pass through in order to access the Pacific Ocean. It's a line that Japan can easily control and monitor. And it also builds a wall of missiles. Any calculus that China is making on whether or not to invade Taiwan or to do anything in the region will have to now factor in this wall of missiles ready to roll. Overall, this increased military presence on this chain of islands gives Japan, and by extension the United States, the ability to monitor communications and troop movements of China.
It's really, really hard. You're not just going to jump on Taiwan and do what you want. You've got all of these other islands. And even if you wanted to, you know, systematically take apart those other islands first, that's going to be really, really hard. In terms of what we've seen amphibious-wise, if you wanted to coordinate and orchestrate taking out those islands before Taiwan, and you'd have to do it all together, that would definitely be the largest amphibious assault we've ever seen in history by an absolute monumental mile, all right? It would be nothing like D-Day. It would be absolutely gigantic. The amount of infrastructure you'd have to put in place to be able to effectively take control of those islands is crazy, all right? It's a massive, massive potential war, that. And that's before you even get close to Taiwan.
Them to act quickly, and it also gives them the ability to pre-position troops and supplies throughout the region, which is a major logistical advantage. But all of this comes with a massive price tag. So Japan, which is formerly a pacifist nation without like a huge military, is actually planning to double their defense spending. They're spending way more on buying weapons than they ever have before, and 97% of those weapons are coming from the United States. The island chain strategy continues down here with the Philippines, close to Taiwan and close to the South China Sea. The US knows that it needs to bolster its presence here, but it's not as straightforward as it is in Japan. The Philippines was a US colony for decades. It's a very sensitive history. And even after Filipino independence, the US maintained a military presence in the Philippines until like the 90s. And then they eventually kicked out the US, as many saw it as just an enduring legacy of US colonialism. But a more aggressive China has become a major threat to the Philippines. Now listen, I'm not going to go into like a full South China Sea thing here, but just know that China claims all of this as their maritime boundary. It's literally a line with 9 dashes that some Chinese official in 1948 drew by hand on a map. This line blasts through the boundaries that the rest of the world recognizes as the Filipino territorial waters.
Yeah.
So there's a conflict in the ocean. And now, on a daily basis, Filipino fishing vessels are harassed by Chinese military vessels who threaten them if they don't leave their waters.
That's
in
mental.
2022, China put a temporary stop to all fishing in the South China Sea, denying the Philippines ability to fish in the West Philippine Sea, which is
horrendous.
Rightfully their waters. But it's crazier than that. The Chinese Navy is like full-blown just bullying the Philippines. They like show up with lasers to harass and blind Filipino ships. I mean, let's remember, the Philippines is a much smaller nation than China and doesn't really have a navy even close to what China has. So now they're in this impossible decision. They have to choose between giving up their sovereignty and fishing rights to their aggressive neighbor, China, or partnering with their former colonizer who also wants to repel China. And in this case, they chose the latter.
China has pushed too hard. It's pushed the Philippines in the South China Sea, what they call the West Philippine Sea.
The Philippines is planning to boost its military presence in the disputed South China Sea.
It started in 2014 when they allowed the US back in for the first time in 22 years. The US presence will technically be in bases that are owned by the Philippines, but the US can have troops, build barracks, and other military installations, and can have pre-positioned supplies there as well. It's basically like the US has bases there, but it's like, shh, it's actually the Philippines. And as part of all of this that we've been talking about, in late 2022, they expanded their agreement, giving the US military access to 4 more bases, bringing the total number of bases on the Philippines up to 9. And look where they selected to put them, here in the north of the country, strategically close to Taiwan, and helping fill their gap in their island chain that they're creating.
Yeah.
This now allows US to have a military presence really close to Taiwan. The US trains very closely with their Filipino counterparts, making them ready to respond very quickly to an invasion in Taiwan, while also repelling Chinese bullying of Filipino fishing activity. Okay, so now the island chain is filling out, giving the US and its regional partners a solid blockade to the Pacific. And it continues all the way down around the South China Sea because of the US presence in Singapore. This is a very united front, but it doesn't stop here. last
This
part of
is
the
so
strategy
interesting.
is potentially the most significant, and it has to do with Australia, a country that is also alarmed by China's rise in the region. So there's this military pact between the US, the UK, and Australia. It's called AUKUS. What it means is that these three countries will work together to create a unified submarine force that will patrol the Pacific. First, what it means is that the US is giving nuclear submarine technology, its most powerful and advanced weapon, freely to Australia. Here are the designs to our most powerful weapons.
Yeah, but the Australians are our buddies, right? We can't like not have Australia a part of that team, yeah? AUKUS, that's nice, man. I like it. Australia, UK, US. Yeah, those guys are real hard asses, man. I know a couple of Australian guys who were in the military, one of which was a Royal Marines Commando, did that, went to Afghanistan, then left, then became an Aussie Commando, and God knows where he is now, but they're really tough sons of bitches, that's for sure.
Take them, foreign country. And then the US and UK will base submarines out of this port here in Australia. It's called Perth. Australian sailors will ride alongside US and UK sailors during submarine deployments. They will learn together, they will work together, they will share classified intelligence. What this means is that there will be a significantly larger number of submarines patrolling these waters. And remember, these are nuclear-powered submarines, which we made a whole video on as well. These things can be underwater for months. They can go on these long patrols over to Taiwan and the South China Sea. They can close up these key choke points, plugging holes in their growing line against China. And crucially, we can be pretty damn certain that a lot of these submarines will be carrying nuclear weapons, adding yet another layer of deterring power to an already really powerful line of defense. And if this wasn't enough, Australia is also building a permanent hangar for US B-52 bombers up here in the Tyndall Air Base in northern Australia. These US bombers carry conventional weapons, but they also carry nukes. So now, US bombers carrying nuclear weapons will have a permanent home in Australia. There's going to be a lot more military hardware in the Pacific because of this. Hardware that carries the most powerful and dangerous weapons we have. This is a very aggressive signal to China that the West is ready.
Not just ready, but able to respond effectively as well. I watched a video, I can't remember if it was from Johnny Harris, but I know that there's an actual base pretty much in the middle of Australia. I think it's a US base. And that US base is effectively, what it does is it covers a satellite area of coverage in that whole entire region, and it's absolutely huge, guys, okay? But what they can control, strategically from that place in Australia is crazy. So they've got that there, they've got loads of infrastructure to be able to not only exist in the South China Sea, but to be able to thrive in activity. So you can kind of understand from two sides why China would get a little bit peed off with that, okay? They've got this massive presence that's controlling pretty much what goes on in the world right on their doorstep. China wants to stop that from happening, but the way in which they're going about it, bullying, fishermen boats in the Philippine Sea, that's not really the best way to go about it, and it's, it's not going to stop anything from happening anytime soon, is it really? Let's think, you've got all of these massive advances in technology and foreign movement within your seas, so your response to that is to go and shine lasers on fisher boats to stop them from earning a living that day. It's a pretty cheap shot, and it actually shows a lot more about you as a country and your actual capability as well, and what you're prepared to do with it, because if that's all you're prepared to do with your technology and your military capability, then you're not really much of a threat anyway. I think what we're worried about here, and America's clocked onto, is not necessarily the threat right now, but the threat in 5 to 10 years if the expansion of the Chinese military continues the way it's going, the trajectory in which it's going. Then they're going to have a few more problems than just fishing boats, like not being able to turn up for work for that day. That's where I think this is going. Good old Sleepy Joe.
If you look at the whole thing, this whole chain, you see how robust this presence is. This is what that military official meant by transformative. The military name for this is the First Island Chain, and it is at the heart of the US and its allies' strategy to counter and contain China. And it's easy to see that this island chain, while protecting a lot of different interests for a lot of different countries, really centers on Taiwan.
Let's look at this, though. I know this might seem quite obvious, but if we're talking about actual what China would have to do in terms of, right, you want this to stop, you want the whole of the UK, US influence to stop in and around the area in which you are operating. China's got to effectively control all of this, you know? All of this. They've got to take the Philippines, they've got to take Taiwan, they've got to take Japan. You can't just say that, you know, we'll take this area here. Okay, because that's just a tiny little portion of the whole bigger picture. You have to take all of it, like, at the same time, effectively, militarily, to be effective. So China's got to be way bigger than what it's currently, because you got to, you know, you look at all of this land that they've got to potentially take here. You've got Taiwan again. You've got all of these islands in between. Then you got the Philippines, who's supported by the US, and I believe some contingents from Australian military as well. And you've got all of this, you know, these little islands spurring off the Philippines and then bordering all the way down here, eventually getting to Singapore, which have close ties to the US. So if China wanted to do anything anyway, yes, Taiwan's a starting point, but effectively that's nothing still in the grand scheme of things for them to be able to achieve their objective.
Island chain, while protecting a lot of different interests for a lot of different countries, really centers on Taiwan. Yeah. A major purpose for all of this militarization, the missiles, the subs, the air bases, the troops, is to prepare for conflict in Taiwan. And this is where we get to the paradox of deterrence. You prepare to fight so that you don't have to fight. All of this preparation might be just what is needed for China to decide that it would be too costly to invade Taiwan. But the other side of that paradox is that all of this looks an awful lot like overt escalation in a conflict.
Yeah, overt escalation, but still, taking Taiwan doesn't solve all of China's problems. It's the start of a very long, nasty, massive military conflict. Bigger than we've seen in a long, long time, guys.
China, this chain of islands is clearly your enemy trying to box you in, to monitor your every move. A superpower from the other side of the world flooding your region with more military hardware.
Kind of similar to what, no, I want to say similar carefully here, I don't want to upset too many people. Kind of similar to NATO, Ukraine and Russia. I'm not going to get into detail with the details on that. Make your own mind up with what I'm saying. But it's this movement towards something, isn't it? And that's kind of what's happening here. You kind of see why people get upset, can't you?
To stop your influence. It would be impossible for this plan to not contribute to a rising of tensions between the two superpowers.
Absolutely
All
agree.
this as the U.S. prepares for a potential conflict with China.
How close are we to all-out conflict between the world's two largest superpowers?
继续沿着错误的道路狂飙下去，再多的护栏也挡不住脱轨翻车，陷入对抗冲突。
Chinese President Xi Jinping has already called this a policy of encirclement and suppression. And let's be honest, he's right. Whether you like it or not, this is containment. Old school Cold War style containment. It's hard not to see it when you look at this map.
Really
and the
is.
Chinese foreign minister said that it would literally be impossible for China to not fight back, to take a move that retaliates against this move. Which means that if the US and its allies aren't careful with all of this, it may send a signal to China that now is the time to invade Taiwan, before all of this plan can fully be implemented. In that sense, this strategy could provoke the very conflict that it is trying to deter.
Which means that the US make loads of money because Taiwan's buying 97% of all of their stuff from the United States. So it's money. It's about money, guys. Oh, and that's it. So fantastic. Fantastic video again, guys, by Johnny Harris. Credit to him. Original video in the description. Hopefully he allows me to do this. I'm a massive fan of his anyway. But troops, if I want you to take anything away from this today, please consider clicking the link below. Online coaching. If you want to change your health and fitness today, I am the man to do it for you. Trust me on that. Click the link. Let's get talking online. Let's start changing lives. Press the link. Join. It is a fantastic opportunity for anyone wanting to better themselves.